Now, as you would have heard by my introduction today, Once Were Warriors, written in the late 1980s, as made in movies, 2 movies in the 1990s, very good ones too. Gosh, international reputation. New Zealand almost became known overseas, in Europe in particular, I have to say. Before Lord of the Rings was made, I think the only movie that Europeans or the Americans had ever seen in their lives was that came from New Zealand was Once Were Warriors. But the concept of family violence and domestic violence, and particularly amongst Māori communities, has been an issue for a very long time. In fact, in 2019, Te Puni Kokori actually put out an infographic, a Māori family violence infographic, which made mention of the fact that for Māori children, for example, have high rates of hospitalisation due to assault, neglect and maltreatment. That for every 6 Asian children, or for every per 100,000, for every 6 Asian children that might end up in hospital, 26 Māori will, 23 Pacific Island children, and just 11 European. And then when they look through incarceration rates, domestic violence rates, deaths, women's refuge attendees, youth assaults, the intervention of Oranga Tamariki, victims and offenders, Te Puni Kokori came to the conclusion that there was a serious problem and had, in actual fact, developed an infographic to make it easy for people to understand. But as I said, it's not a new issue. It's been around for a very long time. And Professor Denise Wilson, who is the AUT Professor of Māori Health, is the latest to attempt, if you like, an overview of all of the information that's out there. There's plenty of information. The question, though, is what to do it. And is there any way that there can be a national strategy to eliminate or at least arrest family and sexual violence in Māori communities? When we talk to her now. Professor Wilson, thank you very much for coming on. Pleasure to have you on.
It's nice being here. Thank you, Michael.
Listen, I've got that right, haven't I? You would have seen, I guess, that Māori family violence infographic as part of your research. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. And not a lot has changed, and I would suggest that for some of our whānau that things have got worse, not better.
Why?
Time.
Okay. As I said, Once Were Warriors, I remember going to that with my very dear friend Norm Hewitt, and at that time I think he was captain, or he was in the Māori All Blacks in actual fact. And his comment to me after we came out of watching Once Were Warriors, like so many of my Māori friends, was, I've just watched a documentary of my childhood. So it's been that way for, gosh, Once Were Warriors was 30 years ago, Denise. Why has there been no attempt or no successful attempt in the last 30 years to deal with the scourge of domestic and family violence within Māori communities in particular?
I think first it's important to remember that not all people who are in violent situations today had a Once Were Warriors background. Yes, some of them did, but not all of them. Why haven't we made any appreciable gains? I think it's a complex problem. It's multi-layered, and we're dealing with some intergenerational transmission of abuse and trauma that isn't addressed. You gave statistics around children and what happens with children in terms of abuse and neglect and death. But we know that very little, if anything, is done about supporting those children who are exposed to violence in their homes and growing up, or who have themselves been abused. And when I was on the Death Review Committee, what we observed was children who had been present at the time of a homicide, either in the home or who had witnessed the homicide, there had been no supports given to them. So if we take it back to our tamariki, our children, then we can see that without giving them the right psychological support, there's a likelihood that they will grow up with some problems as well. But also, if you've grown up in a home and that's all you've known and that's all you've observed around you, you need to be shown other ways to interact with other people and have different strategies to call upon, in those times that you get angry. It's complex, so I want to say that. But
one of the things, Denise, is that I remember I sat on the Māori Affairs Select Committee at Parliament for 6 years, and it's interesting, we actually never addressed this issue, and yet it was out there.
Yep.
There was almost an embarrassment amongst Pākehā to address it because it was sort of felt, well, it's not our place. And I certainly detected that amongst my more liberal colleagues, like, no, we're not going there. And amongst Māori, there was a desire, when I talked to Māori members at the time, people I greatly respected and admired, there was an acceptance that it was also embarrassing for Māori to have to address as well. Is that still, do you think, relevant, those attitudes amongst policymakers now?
I think there is a tendency to apply simple approaches to complex problems. I think we know that there are Māori providers around the country who are doing some good work with our whānau, and there has been a move to call for Māori solutions that are led by Māori. We have now got Te Pūko Tahitanga, which is a ministerial advisory group for tangata whenua who advises the Minister for the Prevention for Family Violence and Sexual Violence. So making sure that there are approaches that are going to be relevant and meaningful for Māori and that will work. So there has been some work in the last few years within Te Puna Awanui, which is the government agency that brings the 10 big government agencies involved in this area together to work on it. And so Te Arariri Kura is the national strategy for the elimination of family violence and sexual violence has been released a few years ago, and now we're working towards that. So Māori do have had a greater say. I think part of the problem in the past is that we've tried to do the same thing, expecting different outcomes. I think we have to change it up and do things differently. And part of that, I was
just thinking, as you were talking to me, Professor, I was just thinking there must be cases or there must be programs over the last 30 or 40 years that have worked, that have made positive interventions, whether it's Māori or mainstream. Have you come across any at all?
I think there are some programs, definitely. If you look at, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, coming from something else. Definitely. I mean, in Kirikiriroa, for example, they've got the Family Start program headed up by Dr. Nicole Coates. So they're dealing with a lot of whānau there and providing supports and things and putting family and children first and looking at how to support whānau to work with children so that there are better outcomes. There are, Te Ohu Mai in Hamilton as well, who works with Māori men and dealing with their trauma but also their use of violence as well. So, we do have programs around that do have some positive outcomes. So I guess it's really identifying what works best and scaling those up.
In your review of the literature and I guess of the statistics that you've been able to get hold of, is the problem percentage-wise, do you think, numbers-wise, the same as, better than, worse than the turn of the century, say 20 years ago in a generation?
Worse than. I think the family violence survey that Janet Fanslow out of the University of Auckland did in 2010 showed that 1 in 3 women had lifetime violence, but that was higher for Māori women. But in this latest survey, the 2019 survey they did, that rate has risen up to 57. I think it's 54% for all women, but up around 67% for Māori women. So definitely the prevalence has shifted quite a bit. We could ask whether COVID has had something to do with that, because although that survey was done just before then, but yeah, definitely going into COVID, that put people into houses and locked them into houses that weren't necessarily safe as well. So yeah, it is quite complex.